Dobro jutro. Dobro jutro, kolege.
Good morning,
Dozvolite da vas
colleagues.
pozdravimo
Allow me to welcome you
ispred FAO.
on behalf of FAO and EBRD that is working on the development of the strategy for irrigation in the Republic of Serbia. I want to wish you a warm welcome to today's workshop. This workshop is the fourth online event that we are organizing in the Republic of Serbia. And at the very beginning, allow me to give a remark. You have interpretation from Serbian to English and from English to Serbian. Click on the globe with interpretation at the bottom left in your taskbar. Select the language you would like to use, the language you would like to listen the interpretation in, and also ensure to tick the mute original audio item. Moreover, the event will be recorded. By participating, you give consent to be recorded as well. This recording will be published on our website, where you can also find many useful information about our project. At the very beginning, I wish to welcome our colleague Milos Milovanovic, who is here on behalf of the Water Directorate from the Ministry of Agriculture. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Water Directorate are our partners in implementing this project. We have great cooperation with the Water Directorate and the Ministry of Agriculture. We are entering the final phase of the project when we will present all the materials produced. The event today is devoted to the statistical overview of irrigation in Serbia. Moreover, we will be talking about the methodology being used. We will be speaking about many different important, interesting aspects of irrigation in our country. However, before we start, I would like to ask Ms. Lazarevic to address the floor. Good morning.
Because of our experts and others who do not speak Serbian, I hope that is okay as we have a translation. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am Marija Lazarevic. I'm a head of Department for Water Management and International Cooperation of the Republic Water Directorate, and first of all, I would like to use this opportunity to welcome you on behalf of myself and on behalf of the Republic Water Directorate. I would like to thank you also FAO and European Bank for the Reconstruction and Development for their assistance in irrigation activities. And I would like to say that during our development of the water management strategy on the territory of the Republic of Serbia, we determined that areas suitable for irrigation cover approximately 1.9 million hectares. But on the other hand, public irrigation hydro systems covers area which is less than 6% of the surface which is suitable for irrigation. And on the other hand, systems that are actually functional cover a much smaller surface area, and larger systems, as we all probably know, are in Vojvodina, as a result of high quality agricultural land and significant quantities of so-called moving waters, rivers Danube, Tisa, and Sava. One of our strategic goals is also revitalization of existing irrigation system, introduction of dual purpose function, irrigation and drainage, if there is opportunities and needs for that, of course. And in parallel, our goal is, if there is an interest and resources, the construction of new systems. Today, we are here on online workshop where we will see what the statistics are today and whether we have a true picture of our state of irrigation. I would like also to point out that the results of these projects are very important to us, and they will serve us to have a clear picture and guidelines on the further development of irrigation in our the Republic of Serbia. I will not use more time. I just want to wish all participants successful work. Thank you.
Hvala vam, gospođo Lazarević, hvala vam puno na vašem uvodnom obraćanju.
Thank you, Ms. Lazarevic. Thank you to the Directorate for Waters we hope this type of cooperation will continue well into the future. I would like to remind all the present that this irrigation strategy is a 10-year strategy. Action plan will be a 5-year action plan, which will operationalize the basis of the strategy in terms of agricultural development and irrigation in the Republic of Serbia. So the action plan is more concrete compared to the strategy, and of course it's shorter compared to the strategy. The action plan will put priority or prioritize investments as such. Thank you again to Ms. Maria Lazarevic. I would like to give the floor to Jacopo Monzini. He is the project leader on behalf of FAO. He is currently in Rome. I would like to ask Jacopo to address the floor on behalf of the project and FAO, and then we'll move on to the working part. Jacopo, you may take the floor.
Thank you very much, Milos, and thank you, colleagues, for participating to this third workshop of the national strategy development. As Milos said, this is another very important event that we have organized to discuss with you key points related to the strategy. Today, Steve, Zoran, and colleagues will present very interesting data and important aspects that needs to be considered during the strategy. So I will not take too much of your time. So once again, welcome. Please be as much as possible active and proactive. Don't feel shy and ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable in speaking, use the chat or the question and answer box. Actually, sorry, only the chat box. And I really hope you will enjoy the workshop and the discussion. Over to you, Milos, for the moderation. Thank you.
Hvala Jakopo, hvala puno. Dragi kolege, tu su bila uvodna obraćanja od strane direkcije.
Thank you, Jacopo. You heard introductory addresses. Now we are going for the working part, and now our expert, Steve Goss, will take the floor. He will start his presentation now.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. Jacopo said he hopes you will enjoy the workshop, so I shall do my best to make it interesting enough to be enjoyable for you. I want to talk we'll structure it in 2 sessions today. First of all, I'll very briefly give you the statistical basis, where the numbers came from, I'm talking about today, and what's the overall picture. I'll look a little bit at farm structures and marketing, understanding what is this agriculture that uses irrigation. Then we'll look in detail at where irrigating farms get their water from and how they apply it to the field. When we looked at that, we were surprised at some of the results. So we went out to the field to see, and Zoran will come in with some photos and video to show you what we found, and then we'll move on to a discussion. And in the second half, I'll look in detail at what crops are grown and irrigated, how much water we think is being used overall, and finally, the thing that matters, the money. What contribution does this make to output value, making money for farms and making money for Serbia? So let's start with the statistical basis. The data I'm presenting today come from 2 sources. From the 2012 agricultural census. This covered 630,000 households and legal entities. It went to everybody who is involved in serious agriculture of any size. So it's an extremely reliable source. And it was followed up 6 years later by a survey using almost identical questionnaire. It didn't go to every farm, but it went to 120,000 farms, including all of the big ones. So this is, statistically, this is extremely reliable data. The definition of a farm was exactly the same in both cases. So anybody with at least half a hectare, plus anyone smaller than that who produced for the market, or small farms who had significant livestock. So that's basically like a cow and a calf or 5 sheep or more. So the same, we're comparing like with like. And the Statistica did a special analysis for me of irrigating holdings and irrigated crops. In fact, they did two. They analysed in detail the census last year, and then they analysed again the farm structure survey. And I would like to thank the people there who put in a tremendous amount of work and went back again and again and again until we knew we got the data right. So this wouldn't have been possible without them. And then we also had data on all of the farms in the country from the census and survey itself, so we could subtract the irrigated from the total and see what was happening with rainfed production. Now we're comparing 2 different years, so are they comparable? So just for the record, the 2011-12 agricultural year had 20% less rain than usual, so it was somewhat dry. 17-18 had 20% more rain than usual, so it was a bit wetter. And we'll discuss in a minute whether that affected any of the results. But first of all, what happened over these 6 years? What we see is a tremendous change. On the left, we have the number of farms that irrigate. This went from 97,000 to 186,000. Nearly 90,000 farms started irrigating. In terms of land, we went from 100,000 hectares to 160,000. So this is a 60% increase in 6 years. It's an incredible rate of growth of irrigation. And I discussed it with statistics. Is it right? Is something inaccurate in the picture? And we said 2011-12, there was an issue that it was dry. On the one hand, more people wanted to irrigate, but there were reports that some of the small local sources were actually running dry. So people may have irrigated early, but not later. Maybe it slightly reduced the numbers in 2012, but not very much. So I think of this increase of 60,000 hectares, at least 50,000 is genuine, minimum 50% increase. What drove it? What caused such a big change in such a small period? Of course, this is something the ministry has been trying to encourage, and it's been trying to encourage it through grants. So here are data on grants over the 3-year period, 2016 to 18. This is where most of the money went, and I didn't have data for the earlier years. What we saw is 3,500 grants were given, but 89,000 farms started irrigating. So the vast majority of people did it without money from the ministry. On the specific area of drip, which is by far the main area of grant support, 2,700 grants were given, but 22,700 farms started using drip. So it looks like what the ministry has done has been motivational more than anything else. It's made a lot more people aware that these technologies, particularly drip, are available. Typically, they will have seen a neighbour or someone in the village who's done it, and then people have copied with their own means. And technology has helped tremendously. You can go into any polyprivet apotheca and buy this really cheap drip tape for fruit or vegetables. It's made it dead simple, so farms are just getting on and sorting out their own irrigation. So that's the main thing that has led to such a big change. Farms. When we think of a farm, what picture do we have in our mind? Let's try to understand a little bit what we've got. Here, I'm looking at the size distribution of farm. I'm counting the number of farms. Blue is 2012, amber is 2018. We've seen a very big reduction in small farms. Some of this will have been a little artifact. If somebody had less than half a hectare but kept a couple of cows, they counted as a farm. If they still keep the land but got rid of the cows, they don't count as a farm. So a little bit of this is people getting out of livestock, but we've checked that's not the main effect. Really what's happened is smaller farms have stopped farming and their land has been transferred to other people. This is the farm distribution. Let's look where the land is. And you can see the land is mainly on farms of 2 hectares and upwards. But it's shifted. It's shifted importantly. The amount of land, as we see, on the smaller farms has gone down, but it's grown over the size range of 5 to 50 hectares. At the top end, farms over 50, we've actually seen a reduction in the number and a reduction in the land. Now, I know several years ago, many of the big holding companies started getting interested in agriculture and investing in it. And I think they may have found it's not such an easy business and may slightly have disinvested. Maybe in the discussion, colleagues will have some experience, some ideas on what's driven that. But what we're seeing is particularly a growth of the medium and medium larger farms. Now, when people talk about farms, a phrase I often hear is, oh, commercial farms and subsistence farms. Are those labels useful for Serbia? We have a set of data here. There was a question in the questionnaire. Did you produce anything for sale? If so, did you sell more than half or less than half of what you produced? So the orange is the amount of land on farms that sold the majority, more than half of what they produced. The blue, these people sold less than half, so they consumed more than they sold. Actually, most of the blue sold something, but not everything. So we see in the past, some of the smallest farms were most often producing for themselves. That has changed. Even the small farms are usually selling. So we see that farms at every size, most farms sell most of their output, and almost all farms sell something. So the idea that we have two kinds of farms, subsistence farms and commercial farms, it's not true. That's not how Serbia works. And in my experience of certainly the smaller farms, you can't divide a farm like that. You have to think of the enterprise. So a small farm might grow wheat and sell all of it. That's commercial. They might fatten a couple of pigs for their own use. That's completely subsistence. And they may keep a couple of cows. They'll use the milk first for the farm and then sell the surplus. So we've got something commercial, something subsistence, and something part commercial, all on the same farm. When we look a bit later at fruit and vegetables, you may see a farm that's mainly subsistence, but it grows 0.2 hectares of raspberries to sell to a cold store. So that bit of their business is commercial. So please bear that in mind when you have this picture of a farm. And the final thing I'd like to look at, we tend to think of a farm as if all it does is farming. That is very much not the case in Serbia. Now, the last data I could get, I have to go back 30 years to the 1991 Census of Agriculture. And it asks how many farms get most of their farm households, get most of their income from agriculture, from non-agriculture, from mixed sources. So only 27% of farms in central Serbia depended mainly on agriculture, 25% in Vojvodina. So 3/4 of farms or farm households got most of their money from something else. This actual survey hasn't been repeated since, but we can look at the household budget survey. And we can look at, I did a survey in Bosnia a few years ago, which has a farm structure quite like central Serbia, the same picture. Most people who are farming have something else as well. At least one person in the household has a full-time job, or they may run a business, they may own a lorry, they may build kitchens, they may have a shop, they have other things as well, or they're retired and they have a pension. So very often agriculture is part of what they do. One of the discussions we got onto in our last session was about uptake. What will farms do if irrigation becomes available? And this structure of the farm really affects that. It affects it in 3 ways. First of all is labor. If somebody is going out to work every day or running a business, they have other things to do with their time. And they will think very carefully whether they want a commitment of things like fruit and vegetables. Do they have the time? So the first thing, labor, comes in. Second thing is capital. If somebody works full-time for someone else, they have no opportunity to invest, and they might welcome the idea that they can build a greenhouse or plant an orchard and invest a little bit in their own right. But if they have their own business, they have to consider, do I put my limited capital in my non-farm business or my farm business? And if you even look at the top end of the scale, the big holding companies that have large farms in Vojvodina also have things like retailing and food processing and completely different businesses. They too will think, do we invest this money in the agriculture business or the non-agriculture? So you have to bear in mind, this is going there. And the third thing is risk. If a household depends totally on agriculture, it wants to earn as much as it can from agriculture, but it's wary of the risk. If they change something and it goes wrong, that could be disastrous. If agriculture is 20% of your total income source, maybe you can take a bit more of a risk. Maybe you can try something new. So when we hold a sort of mental model of how farms might respond to something we offer, we need to bear in mind it's not a farm that's responding, it's a total farm household or it's a total business. So we need that bigger picture. Okay, those are stories about farms in general. Let's come back to irrigation and let's see where people are getting their water from. So the source of water. This was asked identically in the two surveys. And we have two main sources. We have groundwater, either where the farm itself extracts the water or where they simply turn on the tap and get water from vodovod, which almost always gets it from groundwater. This is quite common on very small areas. Fruit and vegetables around the household, greenhouses, nurseries, small areas of high value crops, but quite a lot of people. So now, what is that? About 12,000 people get water simply from the tap. And then we have surface water. On the holding means that the river is actually adjacent or running through your land. Off the holding means there's some kind of system to bring the water over somebody else's land to you. And we can see these 90,000 farms who've come in, most of them were getting groundwater. Quite a few also were getting surface water off the holding. Everything's expanded, but groundwater was the biggest expansion, surface water the second biggest. This is counting holdings. If we see exactly the same thing but counting hectares, one thing changes. So that's numbers, hectares, numbers, hectares. Here is the change. Farms that get surface water, particularly surface water off the holding, typically are irrigating much larger areas. Everything else stays the same. We can also look at the size of farms. So we find that groundwater is used by everybody, particularly by medium-sized farms. But this grey surface water off the holding, that suddenly becomes interesting on the biggest farms. And if we split it by region, it becomes very obvious what's going on. Here we have all the central Serbia where groundwater dominates. Suddenly we have Vojvodina with surface water off the holding. This is essentially the DTD system, which is supplying a lot of water, particularly to big farms and big irrigated areas. So we've really got a dichotomy between this unique system in one part of Serbia with big farms and much more independent systems on small farms in the rest of the country. So far, we've looked at total numbers of farms, total numbers of hectares. Let's bring that down to give a picture of what's happening on one farm. So here by region, I've shown how much land does the average farmer irrigate from one source. So I've filled in the numbers for surface water. So of those farms who mainly get, whose main source is surface water on the holding, in Belgrade, each farm irrigates an average of 1.7 hectares. In South and East, a third of a hectare. In Šumadija, half a hectare. So what we're talking about here is small farms who've managed to find a way to run a pipeline or a small canal across a couple of neighbours' fields to bring water to one orchard or a little bit of land where they grow vegetables. When we go to Vojvodina, suddenly it's 24 hectares. So these on the whole are people who are pumping water out of the drainage canals managed by Voda Vojvodina. So again, two different stories. But bear in mind, when we're talking about irrigated holdings, in most of the country, these are very small areas of land. Now, having got the water, how are farmers putting it onto the crop? We have data split like this. We have people who use just surface irrigation, flood and fallow. And then we have people who use sprinklers, people who use drip irrigation, and we got together, they use sprinklers and drip on the same farm. Some people use some surface and some pressurized, so we can't say much about that. What we've seen is a big increase in surface irrigation. More than 60,000 people have started irrigating, simply putting it onto the land. We were very surprised by this number. We spoke to, I think, 7 different people in faculties, institutes, extension services, and many of them said, no, that's not true. And some said, oh, yes, it is. I see this every day. I went back to the statistical office, said, are you sure? Is this right? Has it been misclassified? I said, no, we checked carefully. This is what we found. So Zoran in a minute will talk a little bit about what he's seen there. This was looking at number of farms. Here's the same data looking at area. Again, the story changes when people have this pressurized system, so they've invested in irrigation equipment. Typically, they're irrigating bigger areas, and particularly sprinklers used on bigger areas. So in terms of the total area of land, pressurized systems are more important, and the surface is more often on very small areas. And then finally, I thought, do we have an interaction? If people get water from one particular source, do they tend to apply it in one certain way? It's not a very strong correlation, but we can see something. People who have groundwater, the most common thing they do is they use it by drip. So they've had to dig a borehole, pump the water. Typically, they use it carefully. And as they have it under pressure, it's quite easy to feed that into a drip system or sprinkler. But still, some take groundwater and use it by surface irrigation. We get the opposite, surface water off the holding, the DTD system. This is largely used by big farms through sprinklers. So there is some interaction between the two. And so at the risk of oversimplifying a very complex picture, we can make a broad generalization. 2 groups of farms. So on the one hand, we have large farms, mainly in Vojvodina, mainly surface water off the holding, particularly sprinkler, also other methods. And then we have small farms everywhere in Serbia, mainly groundwater, but also the other things, particularly drip and other methods. And we are surprised to find that surface irrigation is quite common in all regions and on all sizes of farms. Is that true? Are these numbers right or not? Let me hand over to Zoran to see what he found, and then we can have a discussion. So thank you very much.
Hvala Steve, hvala puno.
Thank you. Steve, Zoran, you may take the floor. Steve really explained this in great detail. He provided us with statistical data and the data he managed to collect. I just want to mention that we have surface irrigation, drip irrigation, sub-irrigation, everything is present in the Republic of Serbia, all types of irrigation that Steve has mentioned. Smart irrigation is something that is present nowadays, where the entire system is automated. However, this is applied in smaller surface areas. When speaking about irrigation, we generally all think of these large-scale systems, machines that you see are used in Vojvodina primarily, and they're used primarily by larger agricultural producers because they have larger surface areas that are their own, that are owned by them. The agricultural households that are smaller in size but are larger than the average use mini linears, drip lines, or dispersers. That's what they generally use. multi-annual plans, both is mainly irrigated using drip irrigation, and the majority of us, when we speak about irrigation, what comes to mind are these types of irrigation systems. However, statistics shows, and we in the field saw, that the greatest number of agricultural producers use irrigation. We visited several agricultural households. I would like to thank colleagues from the agricultural advisory services who have provided us with photos from their areas and regions, which we haven't had a chance to visit, to show that there are agricultural households that perform this type of irrigation. In the Knezevic County, in the municipality of Rajan, you can see that the household of Sasha Lazarevic irrigates with 3 plots of blackberry plants. This is 1 hectare of agricultural land that they irrigate using surface method. The majority of land is planted with blackberries, and the rest is planted with vegetables. You can see how surface area irrigation functions. His grandfather basically dug this canal, and they are using simple pieces of wood to direct the water from this particular canal to their land. In Grabovo, the majority of people irrigate vegetables. Some of them irrigate also fruit and orchards, such as Sasha, who is obviously irrigating his blackberry. When we asked him if he would choose a different way of irrigation, he said, the same as his neighbors, that they would not alter the way of irrigation because this is very simple to them. They have free water from the stream. The canal was created years ago. They don't have to invest, they don't have to buy pumps, they don't have to buy irrigation equipment, and in this way they can irrigate all the land plots that are situated close to the particular stream water. However, Sasha said that if it was possible, he would like to have certain plots of land irrigated that are situated in an uphill area 400 to 500 meters away from the stream. If he had a source of water, he would also irrigate these plots of land. Unfortunately, he does not have the means to irrigate. That is why he's currently only irrigating the plots of land that lay along the canal that gathers the water from the river stream. We also visited a number of other agricultural holdings that irrigate in a similar manner. We have the Pomoravsky County and the Parachin municipality. This is about 0.05 hectares, where Miroslav Tasic's agricultural holding obviously performs surface irrigation. You can see how the water gets to the corn, gets to the maize, and this is the way this holding irrigates. He also irrigates other plots of land that are close to the source of water, and his neighbors also use this type of irrigation. Also in the Pomoravan County, in the city of Jagodina, it was Sasha Kostic's agricultural holding. He irrigates vegetables in this way, but you can see these canals that the water flows through and reaches the crops.
U Zaječarskom okrugu
In Zaječar County, municipality of Knezevic, Dušica Aleksić is the owner of this particular holding. She also irrigates peppers and other vegetables in such a way. This is 0.04 hectares that are irrigated in this manner. You can see how it looks like. You can see how the water flows and gets to the pepper plants, the paprika plants. You can obviously see how irrigation works in Dušica's agricultural holding. As a conclusion, there's still quite a few agricultural holdings that use surface irrigation using flooding. This was maybe a surprise to some of us. We have had many discussions with experts from the Department of Agriculture of the University of Belgrade and other universities, and we had discussions with other experts as well. However, the reality is this: the majority of the agricultural holdings use surface irrigation. The majority of them do not wish to change the way of irrigation because while using surface flooding irrigation, they do not have to invest. They do not have to invest in irrigation equipment. They don't have to invest in the pumps and other equipment. The only thing they have to invest is their own labor, and their labor is spent on small surface areas that are planted predominantly with vegetable crops. Steve, would you have anything else to add, possibly, in this moment?
Thank you very much, Zoran.
Hvala i Zoranu, hvala i Stevu.
Thank you, Zoran. Thank you, Steve. I believe the presentation was very useful. Two technical remarks for all colleagues who might have joined later. The interpretation is available in the bottom right corner. In the taskbar, there is an interpretation globe. Select an interpretation globe, select the language you wish to listen to Zoom meeting in, and also ensure to check the mute original audio option. By participating in today's event, you give your consent to be recorded. This event is being recorded and it will be placed on our website, www.navodnjavanje.info. This website is a source where you can get acquainted with all our relevant activities and also obtain additional information and a broader picture about our project and all of the things needed as Zoran. Again, I believe we had an opportunity to hear very interesting trends that Steve pinpointed to us, which happened between 2012 and this large research study that we've had, a research study of 120,000 agricultural holdings, which ensures availability of data. There's also an increase of surface area under irrigation systems by 60,000 hectares. We also saw a great number of new agricultural holdings with irrigation systems. From Steve's presentation, we obtained an insight into the topic of irrigation, which for people who do not come from the irrigation sector can be perceived differently. People generally believe irrigation is present in large agricultural holdings. However, we had a chance to see that that is not the case. On the other hand, Zoran showed us examples of surface flooding irrigation. We saw that in Serbia, there are certain sophisticated solutions such as smart irrigation. Smart irrigation being used in large agricultural holdings, which are both cost and resource effective. However, we also had a chance to see that there is additional solutions to irrigation, additional methods that are used, such as those holdings in the municipality of Rajan. In this sense, all of this is for us and for the Water Directorate and the Ministry of Agriculture. It's quite interesting for us to find out. This is quite a big challenge for us, how in the strategy to actually define solutions that will be acceptable for a large array of different agricultural holdings with different needs.
Nikakav stimulans da napusti ono što on radi već
We saw several cases where agricultural holdings and their owners do not have any incentive to basically leave the traditional irrigation methods that have been in his family for decades, that have been created by his family, because he does not want to have money or does not have the resources. And this is very important for us to know. And this insight is very important for us because public funds will be budgeted for our strategy. And this budgetary funds will need to be used in a responsible manner. This was the first block of our presentation. Now we proceed to the discussion, and afterwards we'll have a second block of discussions and then the final discussion. We are fully open to your questions now. Them on the other hand, questions can be asked whenever using the chat function, also in your taskbar and towards the left of the screen at the bottom. Let's stop here. Ask the audience if there are any questions. You may raise your hand or you may type up the question in either languages, English or Serbian, in the chat function.
Ja na ekranu ne vidim nikakvu reakciju, ali ako neko ima pitanje, slobodno može da se javi za reč. Ukoliko nemamo...
If you have any questions, you can ask them now, or perhaps if you don't, we can go to our second block and then have Q&A for both blocks. Perhaps I can ask some of the colleagues I see they are here from extension services. They are often, on the ground, so they have very good idea about what happens on the farms. So perhaps they would like to share what happens according to their knowledge. Yes, thank you, Zoran. Please take the floor.
Dobar dan
Da li
svima.
možda im... Da,
Good
izvolite.
morning, everybody.
Poljoprivredna savjetodavna stručna
Suzana Jerkić. I come from Vranje Extension Services. I would like to greet you all and say something about I deal with fruits and vineyards, so there are more and more orchards now, and most often they use the drip system. People opt for the drip system because there is a shortage of water. We have no streams or rivers in the vicinity of their orchards, so they are compelled to use water rationally and to use the drip system. The areas that are near the river Morava or near near streams and other small rivers, they can use surface irrigation, and they do it actually. That is for Vranje. May I ask a question? Please tell me if we talk about places that are at higher sea above level, elevation. What do they use? They use groundwater wells mostly. Thank you, Ms. Jerkić, for your contribution. It is very useful for us to know what happens in the area that you are in charge of, and it's good to hear that there are new investments there. What about other colleagues? Any questions or interventions? All your questions are welcome at any time during presentation, now, later on, during Q&A, it's all the same. If we have no questions now, perhaps.
Dobar dan svima.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ana Đoković. I come from the Extension Service of Užice. I work with fruit orchards also, and I can share with you what happens on the ground. Raspberries are actually predominant in our area, so there is a large number of producers with the drip systems, and many try to find some other options and to somehow have irrigation systems. As for higher areas above 1,000 meters above sea level, people do not find it easy unless they have groundwaters in the vicinity. That is, about our terrain. But for other crops, very little irrigation, actually. Thank you, Anna. We had an opportunity earlier to discuss your region, that was Užice, and we talked about raspberries, raspberry growing, and the situation for raspberry farmers. Thank you for sharing. If there are no questions now, I don't see any reactions from the colleagues present, so I suggest we start with our second block, Steve Goss, Zoran Knezevic, and then finally Q&A at the end. And of course, if you want to ask any questions, you can type them into chat. Now I would like to give the floor to Steve, and if he could continue with the second part.
Okay, what I'd like to look at in this next bit is at the crops. What do people grow overall, and what do they irrigate? So let's start with the big picture. This is total sown area of crops, all of Serbia, whether grain-fed or irrigated. How's this changed over that 6 years? What we've seen some reduction in the area under maize and a bit of an increase under other cereals. so it'll be particularly wheat, but also quite interesting changes in other arable. Oilseed rape went up a lot, sunflower went up, sugar beet went down. Sugar beet is so dependent on the European market and the access we have to the European market is very much policy driven. When we come into the high value crops, very little change in the total potato area. Vegetable area went up overall, fruit area up a little bit, vineyards seems to have gone actually slightly down, but largely constant. So that's the big picture. We talked earlier about farm size, and what we see is a very, very big effect of farm size here. So what I'm looking at here is farm size groups on the bottom, how much of the land area is under each crop. Let me deal first with the green. The green is a category of forage and other, and unfortunately there was slight differences in the categorization between 2012 and 2018. Soya was not given as a separate crop, so it's in with the other. So this green is actually a mix of some very different things, so it's hard to interpret. Everything else is clear. So here we have cereals. Cereals are very important on farms of all sizes. At the top we have grapes, purple. Red is fruit, green is vegetables, brown is potatoes, and I use the same colors on every slide so you can follow easily. What we see is that the smaller farms are putting close to 30% of their land under high value crops. And the bigger the farm gets, the less and less is under high value crops. Because when farms get bigger, they hit management issues. So they tend to move to crops that are easy to mechanize, easy to manage, and easy to market. So that means essentially arable crops. But what we see when we get into the bigger farms, the 10 and the 50 hectares and up, is it's not just cereals. They have a bigger mix. So here we're getting our sunflower, soya, our oilseed rape, our sugar beet. So these are particularly the crops grown on bigger farms, but they're mechanized crops. Not much land on the big farms is growing the high value labor intensive crops. This is crops overall. Now let's see what's happening on our irrigated land. So it's again a split of land. We see the same thing, that maize went down, irrigated maize down slightly, other cereals up slightly. These numbers are interesting. Out of this 27,000 hectares of irrigated maize, about 13,000 is in Vojvodina. Professor Milovanovic gave me some data on the seed production. We have almost 12,000 hectares of maize grown for seed in Vojvodina. So it seems very likely that most of what's being irrigated here in Vojvodina is actually seed crops. So it's, if you like, it's a high value end of a low value crop. It's important to bear in mind. Relatively small areas irrigated under the other crops. Sugar beet was the most popular other arable crop to irrigate, but that's come down a lot. But then we move into the high value crops and look at the changes. The area under irrigated vegetables is now 2.5 times what it was in 2012. Think back 2 slides, we saw the total area of vegetables went up a little bit, but the area of irrigated vegetables has gone up a lot. 2 things have happened. People who already grew vegetables have introduced irrigation, and people who've started growing vegetables have gone in with irrigation from the beginning. We see the same thing with fruit. The area of irrigated fruit has more than doubled. So really the whole increase in irrigated area is in these 2 crops, vegetables and fruit. Now, how does this change with farm size? So it's like a previous graph, but only for irrigated. And we see the same thing. Smaller farms are irrigating grapes, fruit, vegetables, potatoes. 80% of all irrigated land on small farms is in high value crops. And as the farms get bigger, that reduces. So when we get to the biggest farms, only 1/4 of their land is on irrigated land is in high value crops, most of it low value crops. And there's a very abrupt switch from the 10 to 50 hectare group to the over 50 group. Suddenly we've moved into the Vojvodina effect, the Kombinat effect, the DTD system effect. We have a big change in what's grown, what's irrigated. That is very important in terms of the value share. Now, we've seen there's been this very dramatic increase in fruit and vegetables, irrigated fruit and vegetables. Where is it? So let's have a look at the 4 regions of Serbia. Belgrade doesn't have a lot of these crops. Fruit went up a little bit, but vegetables doubled. South and East Serbia, irrigated fruit up almost 3 times. Irrigated vegetables up 2.5 times. Shamadia and West Serbia, this had the biggest fruit area to start with, but it's still almost trebled. Vegetables almost trebled. Vojvodina doubled the area of fruit, doubled the area of irrigated vegetables. So with a slight exception of Belgrade, this is not something focused in 1 or 2 special places. This is a movement across the entire country. People are finding that where they've got the right conditions, where they've got some good land and a water source, they're realizing there's money to be made in fruit and vegetables, and it's growing everywhere. To my mind, this is an incredibly positive trend. Now, we've looked so far at the total area under rain-fed crops and the area under irrigated crops. Let's look at the share of land. So let's cut it a slightly different way. And we see that if we look at the cereals, only 2.5% is irrigated. Other arable, 3%. Now, we know that Serbia is a very successful producer, a very successful exporter of maize, other grains, soya, sunflower, sugar beet. The vast majority of this is not irrigated. What is happening is that Serbia has favorable soils and favorable climate, which lets the country grow these crops successfully, even without irrigation. And Serbia has learned how to use that and become a major exporter. When we move to potatoes, we had 1/4 irrigated. It's actually dropped slightly to 1/5. So potatoes respond well to irrigation, but we still have a lot of these areas higher up in the hills with enough rainfall that people are managing to grow potatoes without irrigation. Vegetables, how the story has changed. In 2018, 93% of the whole vegetable area is irrigated. I'm sure that's kept growing over the last 3 years. I think you'll find now more than 95% of vegetables are irrigated. And when we look at what is not irrigated, it seems to be a few things. Onions, garlic, possibly carrots, some of the cabbages at certain times of year, people can get an okay yield without irrigation. But if you're going to grow peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, watermelons, strawberries, you don't even think about going into the business without irrigation. The two go hand in hand. The fruit story is fascinating. We've seen this very big increase in irrigated fruit, but still the large majority of Serbia's fruit is not irrigated. Why? I think that this is the area with the greatest potential for growth. I would hypothesize that we can split fruit into sort of 2 categories, what I would call low intensity and high intensity. Low intensity would be traditional orchards, standard trees, so often big isolated trees, quite often old, quite often in fairly poor condition, sprawling over hillsides covering large areas. Because their productivity is fairly low, the economic response to irrigation won't be so high. Because the trees are widely spread, the cost of moving water from one tree to the next will be relatively high. And quite often these are in hilly areas with no immediately available source of irrigation. So I think people may have quite good reasons for not irrigating their fruit. Then we could look at the high intensity. So with any kind of berries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, they're all high intensity. They will respond well to irrigation if it's there. These are often grown in the hilly areas in West Serbia. Sometimes there just isn't a convenient river. It's deep groundwater. So people would like to irrigate, but they can't. Where they can irrigate, they do. And then we get the intensive top fruits, closely spaced orchards of apples, pears, plums, cherries, sour cherries, trellis and wire systems. Nobody is planting a high density orchard without irrigation. They go together. So I think we're going to see two areas of development. To some extent, we can get more irrigation to existing orchards through cheap borehole systems and cheap drip irrigation, but it will be limited by topography. I think the main growth we will see is as people plant new orchards, they're really only going to do it where they've got irrigation. So it'll be new land, irrigated land, that I think will be the growth area. And I can't read it. Let me just come back slightly. Other arable covers many things. If we break down the arable side of the story, particularly we got maize, seed maize, but legumes. Farmers find legumes respond well to irrigation, or seed rape less so. Sunflower, it's hardly worth irrigating, but sugar beet has a better division. So just thinking here, when we see that 3% of arable is irrigated, bear in mind there's actually a lot of complexities within there. Now, here we've been looking at the country as a whole. Let's start to put this down to individual farms. How much are we talking about? So let me talk you through this summary graph. The blue is measuring hectares. So of people that irrigate maize, we've got close to 30,000 hectares of irrigated maize on about 18,000 holdings. So the average area irrigated, 1.5 hectares per farm. Wheat, a little bit more, 4. Legumes, tiny, 0.2 hectares. But then suddenly we move into industrial crops and we've crossed the Sava, we're back in Vojvodina. 23 hectares of rape, 8 hectares of sunflower, 55 hectares of sugar beet. Different farms doing different things. And then when we come back to our high value crops, what we're seeing is large numbers of tiny plots. The average area of irrigated potatoes, 0.2 hectares. Average area of irrigated vegetables, 0.4 hectares. Irrigated fruit, 0.6 hectares. Grapes, where they're irrigated, 0.3. So we are talking about large numbers of people growing tiny areas of high value crops. This works because over the last 20 years or so, Serbia has managed to develop a highly effective system of aggregation. We have cold stores, and in the west of Serbia, we have many of them. Somebody in Bajna Bašta, Opština, can choose between 3, 4, 5 different cold stores for their raspberries. It's a competitive market. We have many middlemen, traders who will come to your farm and buy things. They are feeding through this network into an international feed chain. People in Arilia can be producing raspberries straight into punnets. They are appearing on supermarket shelves in England within a couple of days. A very effective marketing chain that manages to work with the farm structure that we've got. We're starting to see a new development in vegetables. People are growing these cornichoni, the small pickling gherkins. People grow tiny amounts of this, but there's a system of traders that are getting that through, particularly to Germany, and feeding into a massive market. And because we have this highly effective marketing system, our small farms are able to feed into big markets. But why are they so small? If this is such a big business, why aren't people growing more? What it really comes down to is this factor of labor. Most of these small farms have some other incomes as well and some other interests. They don't have so much time to put into agriculture. And also these activities are very labor intensive. If you have a hectare of peppers, you have 20 kilometers of row, 20 kilometers to walk up and down. If you have a tenth of a hectare, you've still got 2 kilometers to go up and down every day to harvest. That's a lot of work. People find it very hard to employ casual labor. Often it's not there. People who want jobs want a job all year round, not just at harvest time. And we no longer have such easy access to cheap casual labor from Bosnia and Bulgaria. So what farms are typically doing is they're growing the amount of vegetables that they can manage with their own labour. You take the growth of raspberries. This has almost entirely been a second activity to farms that are already having another business or job. So basically people tend to grow 0.15, 0.2 hectares. It's the amount of raspberries that a household can harvest in their summer holiday. And I think that this is putting a cap on how much land any given farm is going to grow with fruit and vegetables, even with irrigation. They're not limited by irrigation, they're limited by labour. So the main area I would see for growth is not more land on existing farms, but it's more farms thinking, let me get into this. Let me put 0.1 hectares of raspberries or 0.2 hectares of peppers. So I think we're going to see the growth area as new people come into the game. And then let's move now to look at a subset. All the farms who have irrigation, what do they grow? And we find what we've got here, the orange is rain-fed, the blue is irrigated. Even farms with irrigation, most of their land is under cereals. They are farms like every other farm in Serbia. Mainly they grow cereals. So don't think of a fruit and vegetable farm. Think of a typical mixed farm with its wheat and its maize, but with a bit of fruit and vegetables as well. It's a part of the farm. It's not the whole farm. And when people have access to irrigation, they don't put it everywhere. Even if they've got water, most of them don't irrigate their maize unless they can do this really cheap, easy surface irrigation like we saw in the pictures. They concentrate their irrigation where it matters most, particularly on the vegetables and on the fruit. Why? Well, we know we have a very fragmented land structure. So some people have their parcels, only some of them are near a river. So they will use that parcel to grow the things that respond to that irrigation. If they're investing in a borehole and a pump, they will only make the investment where they are going to grow fruit and vegetables. So what this does, it lets people focus the investment just on that little bit of the farm where they get the high return. So of all our farms, only some irrigate. Of our irrigating farms, only some of the plots irrigated. But that is concentrating the water, concentrating the capital on these high value crops that use it most. So overall, we're getting a very effective use of capital, labour, irrigation on the areas that need it most. Now, the risk of becoming a little more complex, let's just step back to think of the different sources of water, different irrigation methods. Do we have a correlation between them and between what people grow? Here I am looking at the source of water and what people grow. And we've seen with groundwater, big increase, but look, the area under low value crops has stayed absolutely static. All of this expansion has been on vegetables and fruits. And even at the other end, if we look at our big Vojvodina farms using surface water off the holding, again, they're not growing more maize and wheat and sunflower. They too are expanding vegetables and fruit. So some vegetables you can mechanize. So your onions, your carrots, these are susceptible to mechanization. People are expanding these areas under mechanization. So we've clearly got a correlation between the source of water and what you grow. And if we chop it the other way, what happens if we look at the form of irrigation? And again, surface irrigation has expanded on everything, but particularly people have been using it on vegetables, pressurized irrigation, surface and drip on both vegetables and on fruit. So there's some correlation there. Let's look at individual crops, how they're irrigated. Potatoes are most often irrigated by surface. You have got the rows, the furrows are there anyway as part of growing the crop, so it's dead easy just to pour water down them. We also have surface irrigation of cereals, forage and other arable. But look at the orange, this is the sprinkler. Arable crops are the big target of sprinkler irrigation because it suits the structure of the field. Grey is drip. Drip irrigation is particularly common on, you've got vineyards and fruit, we get a lot of surface and we get drip, but drip is really the best method of irrigating trees, because you've got a row of trees, they're there year after year, you can put in the drip. This particular technology is suited to a certain farm. So the technology of drip is really suitable to fruit trees, and the technology of sprinkler is very suitable to arable crops. So at the risk of oversimplification, let's revisit our generalization and say a bit more. So we know we have large farms, often in the Vojvodina, often using surface, often using sprinkler, typically low value cereals and other arable crops. And our small farms found everywhere using groundwater, using drip and other, they grew our fruit and vegetables. But there are many, many exceptions. We have small farms using surface water. We have large farms growing vegetables. And I talked earlier about saying maybe we can split fruit into two groups, low intensity and high intensity. I think we can also identify what I would call high intensity arable. Sugar beet's a pretty high intensity crop. Seed maize and seed wheat, these are high intensity crops. And also irrigation lets you do something quite interesting. It lets you grow a crop of early winter wheat or barley and follow it with late soya. When you're getting two crops in a year, that's high intensity. So I think what we're actually finding is that the real low intensity, the single crops of cereals, these are hardly irrigated at all. What people are doing, arable farmers, when they irrigate, they're going to more intensive arable, double crops, seed crops, sugar beet. So again, we're getting this very encouraging concentration of irrigation on those things that give the best return. So thank you for your patience. That's quite a complex picture through the crops. Let's move on now and let's look at the water. So we have some data on water use. And now I have to put a big caveat. Everything I've given you so far, I think these are highly reliable statistics, and the Statistical Office stands by them. On water, in 2012, Serbia followed Eurostat, and they asked every country to try to measure the amount of water used for irrigation. We know that most farms do not have water meters. They don't really know. So the enumerators went to the field with a guideline that this crop might be irrigated 3 to 6 times. It might be getting 500 to 1,000 cubic meters per hectare. And they sat with the farmers and said, well, when did you irrigate? How much? So maybe it was 2,000. Yeah, okay. These are what we could call approximate data. And statistics don't like giving data they don't believe in. They didn't repeat this in 2018 because it's not super accurate. So I've had to use 2012 application rates for 2018 areas, but I've done this quite well. So I've said in the same municipality, farms of the same size, with the same source, the same method, the same crop, it's quite reasonable to assume they irrigated the same. So we now move into approximate data, but I don't think they're too bad. So let us look at how much water was used. So we have the source of water. We had a big increase in groundwater and a moderate increase in surface water. And here are the numbers. We went from 230 million cubic meters to 430 million cubic meters of water. Now, how much water is 430 million cubics? Imagine you took all that water and you made one gigantic ice cube. That ice cube would be 3 times the height of the Eiffel Tower. If you want a Serbian analogy, let's put that ice cube at Ušće. The top of that ice cube is 200 meters higher than the top of the radio mast and Avila Tower. This is one big ice cube. But it's July. That ice cube is going to melt. Let's let that ice cube melt and flow over all of Serbia. It's a layer of water 5 millimeters deep. That's one rainy day. Not so much looked at like that. Now let's let that water run into the rivers, flow down, get into the Danube. It will flow over the border to Romania. It's 1 day's ordinary flow. So whilst it's a lot of water, in terms of Serbia's total renewable water resources, irrigation is using really a tiny fraction. And we've been looking quite a lot at water resources. There are limits in various ways, but we've still got a lot more usable water. Okay. This is the split by source. And we can see that groundwater dependence has gone up slightly. It's now at 64%. So nearly 2/3 is groundwater, a bit over a third is surface water. These are approximate. Let's say that's somewhere between 55 and 70 is groundwater, somewhere between 30 and 40 is surface. They're not precise numbers, but they're general trends. Do we have to worry about this groundwater? Are we overusing it? So let's do what we've done several times before. Let's put this in context. So here are our farms. Our smallest farms irrigate on average, this is only irrigating farms, So they average 1/4 hectare and they use 900 cubic meters a year. The next group use 1,200, 1,700. Farms up to 10 hectares, all of these farms, on average, they use less than 2,500 cubic meters and less than 1 hectare. The law requires you need to apply for water conditions if you irrigate more than a hectare or use more than 2,500 cubic meters. The vast majority of irrigating farms use so little water they wouldn't even need to apply for water conditions. And then this group here of 10 to 50, yes, they just come into that category, but still, they use less than 5,000 cubic meters. It's a tiny amount of water per farm. And then we have this group here. We have 875 irrigating farms over 50 hectares. On average, they use 91,000 cubic meters and they irrigate 63 hectares. So we have a lot of farms using a little bit of water and a few farms using a lot of water. But of course, we've got a lot of these small farms. So let's chop it this way. Orange is looking at the total amount of water. So the biggest water users are actually farms of 2 to 5 hectares. They use 1/4 of all the water, but the amount per farm is small. And the biggest farms, they use just under 1/4 of the water. Yeah, I think we have issues on groundwater use, but in terms of controlling it, we need to make sure that we focus our controls on a few areas where it is short, where it is problematic. Let's again do a bit of putting it in context. Total groundwater use is about 270 million cubic meters. If we divide that by all of the land below 500 meters of altitude, so all of Serbia's lowland, we're using about 50 cubic meters per hectare or about 5 millimeters. So overall, we're not using a lot of groundwater. And I would say there are 3 areas. 2 are not problematic, 1 is. A lot of this groundwater is being drawn from shallow alluvial aquifers that are linked to the Drina, the Tisa, the Sava, the Danube. Effectively, these farms are using river water, but instead of pumping it sideways, they're letting it flow sideways in the alluvium and they're just lifting it up into the field. So basically they're taking water from the river in a natural route. This is not a problem. There's a lot of water there. Then we have people taking groundwater in hilly areas. It's not alluvial in the same way, but these are wet areas and there's very few farms really irrigating. I don't think most of these are putting a big pressure on the water supply. But then we got another area. If we go to northeast Vojvodina, if we go Pančevo and up, we have got people who are going down 100 meters or more, going into fossil water, limited aquifers with a slow recharge that are important sources of drinking water. Now, this is an issue. So I think if we're going to look at better control of water or alternative sources, we've got certain specific areas where it matters. So can we focus there? And finally, as somebody noted earlier, the vast majority of these water users, they're private sources and they're not licensed. Naughty. These people should have a license and they should pay for their water. So if they did, how much would they pay? If people paid just the abstraction fee set out in the Uredba u visini naknada za voda, the small farms will be paying 104 dinars a year on average. These ones 140, 190, 250, 500. The vast majority of these farms, it would cost more to collect the fee than it's worth. Wouldn't be very logical to go out and enforce fee collection. It would just be bureaucracy for no value. Then let's move to these big guys with their 90,000 cubic meters. If they have to pay only for the water, so often they're paying for the drainage and other services, but just for the water, they would be paying 10,000 dinars a year. This is nothing in terms of the economy of a farm. So when people decide whether or not to irrigate, they consider many economic factors, but the price of water is not one of them. They're looking at other costs, not the water cost. So essentially, we're not using price as a method to allocate water at the moment. Then I have, I think, just 2 more slides to finish the water story. This is which crops use the water. Maize has stayed constant. There's been some increase in other cereals, but the big increase, we're putting all that extra water on vegetables and we're putting it on fruit. So we're using a valuable resource and we're using it for a valuable crop. And then we can get a final breakdown of where the water goes. Vegetables, fruit, vineyards. So about 68% of the water is going on high value crops. Again, it is going exactly where we want it to go. So, I mean, very rarely do I get such a positive picture when I analyze statistics. So far, many, many positive things. Now, we had a session a time back on irrigation, on economics irrigation, and we said that farmers irrigate to make money. Farmers irrigate to make money, Serbia irrigates to make money. So how much money do we make? The Statistical Office uses a standard EU system called standard outputs. And what they do for each crop, they say, what is the average output value per hectare? And they do it for 2 regions. RS1 is the north, Vojvodina and Belgrade. RS2 is the south. So it's Šumadija in West Serbia, South and East Serbia. They generate a figure overall, and by looking at differences in yield and cropping, I managed to split it. So I get a typical yield grain-fed and a typical yield irrigated. So let's come through and let's look at our arable crops. Most of our arable crops have an output of between 600 and 1,000 euros per hectare if they're rain-fed. And if we irrigate, we get over 1,000. We don't quite get up to 2,000, but they're 1,000 and something. Then we can take a step up. The more intensive arable, the high intensity arable, our legumes and our sugar beet, these are into the realm of 2,000 to 3,000 euros a hectare irrigated. Then we can step up again. Our potatoes and vegetables, these are hitting 3,000 to 4,000 per hectare. And there's a big variation. Your mechanized vegetables, your carrots and root crops, they are lower. Your labor intensive vegetables, your peppers and tomatoes, they're right up here. And when we go to labor intensive fruit, we double it again. We're up to 8,000 euros a hectare. So I've been talking about high value crops and low value crops. Those figures are really true. The values are very, very different between the 2 crop groups. So what I then did is I took the values, I multiplied by the areas, and I tried to get into money. So where does Serbia make its money? Yellow is rain-fed, blue is irrigated. So we're making a lot of money from irrigated maize, came down slightly over time, and quite a lot of money from irrigated other cereals, and a little bit from irrigated maize. Across our other arable areas, the vast majority of it is coming from rain-fed crops, but a bit of money from irrigated sugar beet. Potatoes, not such a big area is irrigated, but because the yield's so much higher, it's an important contribution. But look here, our big money is irrigated vegetables and quite a lot from irrigated fruit. But again, because we have so much fruit that's not irrigated, most of Serbia's fruit exports, most of our apples, sour cherries, raspberries and plums, they're unirrigated. And we manage to succeed by quantity of land rather than intensity of production. So I think that expansion of the fruit area and pushing this area up, that is our #1 area for growth, and expanding the amount of area under irrigated vegetables, that's our #2 irrigated area for growth. So this is where I see we have the future potential. Put it together, and this is an estimate of part of Serbia's output value. It doesn't count forage, it doesn't count soya, but of the things I could measure, we find that irrigation covers 6% of the area, but it generates 16% of the output value. So it's making a very important contribution to the overall economics of the farm and the overall economics of the country. And as my last graph, I wanted to think a little bit, where does this benefit come from? You know, irrigation lets you do two things. It increases the yield of your crop, so you could grow the same thing at a higher yield, but it also lets you grow different things, high value crops that really wouldn't work without irrigation. So there's two effects, which are biggest. So here, the average standard output for all of our rain-fed agriculture across everything is a bit over 1,100 euros per hectare. If people had got irrigation, but just grew the same thing, what would happen? They would double the value. They would have gone from 1,000 a hectare to 2,000 a hectare. But that isn't what people do. When they get irrigation, they don't grow the same thing, they grow different things. And if we look at what they really get, they're getting 4,000 euros a hectare because they have changed their farming structure. Hand in hand with irrigation goes a change in farming. So if we look at the increase from the starting point, unirrigated one crop mix to irrigated another crop mix, 30% of our benefit is higher yields, 70% of our benefits is the change to higher value crops. So as we develop irrigation, that's what we want to see. We want to see people intensifying their crops, moving to high value. And here we must bear in mind the limiting factor, it is not water. The limiting factor is labor. So we are going to be saying, how can we get more people to irrigate their small areas of vegetables and do it within the overall economy of their farm? We'll do storage of big farms. We've now got 10% of Serbia's apples are grown on big farms in Vojvodina, but all of our other fruit is almost entirely small farms. All our vegetables is mainly small farms. So how can we develop fruit and vegetables irrigated on small farms within the capital and labour and risk constraints of those farms? That rather difficult question is the one I think we have to deal with. And I would conclude with a positive trend and a warning signal. Generally, what we see is highly positive, a 60% increase in just 6 years. We've seen the expansion is almost entirely expanding high value crops. The extra water is almost entirely high value crops. And we've seen that Serbia's small farms, often we see them a problem. They're a problem to manage for marketing. They're a problem to give grants to. But what they mean is we've got a tremendous labour resource spread out. And that labour resource has allowed Serbia to develop these high value crops. So in this area, our small farm structure is an asset, not a liability. And the final thing, which I see is very positive, the ministry has encouraged, it has set the direction for development. It's given grants for drip irrigation. In the past, it's given grants for cold stores. But now people have picked up the baton and run with it. And most of what's being done is being done by farmers themselves. And they're doing everything. They are drilling the boreholes, they're mending the pumps, they're paying the electricity bill or buying the diesel. They are not dependent on the ministry. When we talk about drainage, we're going to see the problems we have if we don't have enough money in public drainage to maintain it properly. Most of our irrigation does not face this problem. It's not done by government, so it doesn't need government money. So we've got highly sustainable, highly resilient irrigation because of this structure. So good, 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 but. The but is we have an increase in groundwater use. I think in most places is not a problem, but I know in some areas it is a problem and it could become more so. So I think we need to find a policy direction, a water resources policy direction, which lets all the good things continue. You know, my father used to say, if it ain't broken, don't mend it. Much of Serbia's irrigation is not broken. Leave it alone. It's going in the right direction. But we have some areas where we have problems to solve. And we have some areas of untapped potential, which really needs intervention from the government. I think we need to focus on those areas in our strategy, and then we can take a big thing, a good thing, and make it better and bigger. Thank you very much for your patience. I've thrown a lot of data at you. I hope you've understood, but I found it fascinating. It took me several months to go through that story, and I tried to go through it in an hour. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Thank you very much.
Steve, hvala ti puno. Ja sam uživao u tvojoj prezentaciji, mislim da je bila vrlo interesantna i da daje jedno drugo svetlo u potpunosti na navodnjavanje.
Steve, you shed light to irrigation in Serbia. And as far as I know, no one in Serbia has done this research so far. So thank you to my side, Zoran, would you like to take the floor now and then open up for discussion?
Žali na ton.
We have issues with the tone. In the first half of the event, everything was fine. Maybe to ask our technicians to volume, possibly.
Thank you, Milos. I can say that Steve's presentation was very useful. We saw a lot of very useful data and analyses, and Steve already mentioned what should happen in our further work in water directorate and in other sectors and in agricultural sector, who should be working, you know, promoting irrigation, and in the future, our agricultural holdings should irrigate more services. I would just like to add some things. As Steve mentioned, in labor-intensive crops, unfortunately, our average farmer is 61 years old. That is why we have problems. They need to irrigate, of course, their areas. And I agree that fruit and vegetables are intensive crops. Of course, they need to be priority, and with no irrigation, we could have no quality or quantity as we do. And you know, we export most of the fruits, so the data show that in intense orchards, intense plantations, in apples, for instance, apple orchards over the last 15 years, we worked most. We have additional 3,000 hectares of apple orchards, and also other, you know, like blueberries and raspberries as well. And they mostly use cutting edge irrigation, as it were. By all means, our farmers need to change their structure if they wish to irrigate, and it is up to the government and to this project to propose this in the strategy and action plan, how those farms will get the water if they wish to irrigate. Just a few things related to incentives. The government invests into infrastructure through the Water Directorate and the public companies, Voda Vojvodina and Serbia Vode. And then, you know, there are channels. There are canals, large canals distributing water, primary canals, leading water to specific regions and municipalities, and the provincial secretariat and the ministry itself. We invest into equipment for drilling wells. We have this Directorate for Agrarian Payments. This is one of the channels, and Steve showed how the number of beneficiaries using those grants increased. Of course, there should be more, but it's still a significant increase. Also, in the previous period, Serbia had a project that had projects like Abu Dhabi Fund, and a large number of a large amount of funds was invested into irrigation structure. This was this project, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development will contribute to increasing irrigation in Serbia. Thank you, Zoran, very much for your intervention. Thanks, Steve, once again for his presentation. This was a very, very useful presentation, seeing irrigation from a completely new angle, showing completely new, shedding completely new light on that, especially when it comes to vegetable and fruit growing. And some of the colleagues perhaps never knew that, but one of the ideas in cooperation with our partner EBRD is to stimulate transfer of agricultural production to, of course, go from low value production, which is traditionally, cereals, to high value crops, fruits and vegetables. So this is a trend that we are seeing, but it can also be further encouraged through investment, and in most cases, a modern production depends on sufficient water being available. Now I would like to open the floor for questions, comments, suggestions. We have a comment in the chat from Jasna Grabic. She is from Faculty of Agriculture from Novi Sad. Would you like to say it, or would you like me to read it? She said that in Vojvodina, the problem is with salty water, and also iron and manganese in the water, which can actually be a problem for the irrigation system in terms of clogging it. And Jasna also has a suggestion. She suggests that before you invest, before you provide incentives, government incentives, regardless whether it's the central or the local level, but budget funds for investing. She suggests that water should be tested to see whether it's good for irrigation. I believe this is a very good comment. Zoran or Steve, would you like to respond? Well, I can agree completely. This will perhaps make things a little bit more complicated, but we actually don't want to irrigate and ruin the soil. We want to avoid that.
I think issues like this exist, and this is really the way we should look at irrigation. We're not looking for blanket solutions, but there were certain places who've got certain problems we have to solve, and certain places have got certain opportunities we can exploit. I'm not quite sure what the solution is there. but we need to take account of it. It's going to be a mixture of should we irrigate at all, and also there's an extension role there. Are people irrigating appropriately, leaching salts out of the topsoil, etc. So I think there's probably a double solution to this particular problem.
Hvala Steve, hvala Zorane. Ja mislim da ovo...
Thank you, Steve. And Steve also mentioned it in his presentation. She noticed that the number of approved incentives and grants is far, far lower compared to the total number of farms investing in irrigation. That is what Steve noticed, and he said that actually Ministry of Agriculture provided a model, a trend, a direction to be taken in agricultural production. And then perhaps the ministry should look into this, what Jasna said. So when subsidizing equipment, they should require mandatory water testing. I believe there is a similar thing for land as well when we talk about fruit and vineyards. So fruit orchards and vineyards. So those people, of course, who do not use subsidies, then they should, do it for themselves. But this is a strategically important direction, and I believe we should really take this into account and formulate it as one of our recommendations. Žarko Petrovic from UNDP would like to take the floor. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for this highly comprehensive and convincing research. I would just like to focus now on the issue of availability of water. In climate projections for Serbia and the region, we have a lot of discussions about, availability of water. So the strategy and further things to be developed in line with this strategy should by all means take into account data about projected availability of water. We have data for additional 20, 40, 60 years by 2100. This is not a huge period when we talk about water, Sratkovo Dam and so on. This is not a huge period. And already the data for these 20-year increments provide wealth of information that we should take into account when we plan and project investment into inventions in the following period, into irrigation in the following period. And that is an additional next step, but a very logical step in order to avoid vulnerability to climate change. And there is a climate change that is inevitable. Definitely. Thank you very much, Žarko, for your comment. Before I give the floor to Steve or Zoran, I would just like to say that your comment is absolutely to the point. We have taken water resources into consideration. We discussed this with professor from Belgrade University. We prepared a document on water resources. We took everything into account. I believe that this document is also on our website. Correct me if I'm wrong. But now Zoran or Steve will directly answer your question. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Yes, it's something we're looking at very, very seriously. Currently, I'm working with some of the experts from FAO, looking at the climate models. So we are looking at 21 different global and regional climate models under the two different pathways, the RTP 4.5 and 8.5. So if you like, under the optimistic scenario and the pessimistic scenario. And we're linking that to a sort of aquacrop style model to see how this is going to affect yields and economics of irrigation in Serbia. I'm not sure whether I should give the answers yet, because we will present on this later, but one thing that's very important, this strategy is going to have a validity of 10 years. It's going to lead to investments, which will be subject to a discounted cash flow analysis, typically over a period of 20 to 30 years. Because if you invest in pumps and pipes and things, within 30 years, you need to replace them. So our time frame for this specific question of should we invest in irrigation is now till mid-century. If we asked, do we need to take action now to protect the planet and prevent global warming, then all the things projected up to 2100 are vitally important. But for this specific area of investments to make under this strategy, we're taking the shorter time frame. And there's tremendous variation between the models on what will happen with rainfall. Serbia's location is very sensitive to the models. The general picture seems to be that for the next 20 to 40 years, Serbia will get slightly wetter, and then it will start to get drier. So in simplistic terms, what we may be seeing in the medium term, short to medium term, is a bigger need for drainage. And when we get into the second half of the century, a bigger requirement for irrigation. But we'll come back to you with much more detailed projections on that. And we would like to run through it with UNDP and with the climate modelers and make sure that all the experts are fully in agreement that this is a sound analysis. Thank you.
Hvala, Steve. Ja bih možda iskoristio ovu priliku da se zahvalim.
Thank you, Steve. I would like to use this opportunity to thank Žarko and his entire team in UNDP. They actually did help us a lot, and they were very, really supportive, provided us with precious data, and I believe we are all working towards the same goal, all of these international agencies. We want Serbia to fare better. In the meantime, Jovana Rašković posted a link in our chat to our website where there is this document on water resources, so you can go and check this document if you wish. This is a wealth of analytical data systematized in a manner never seen before. And if you are interested in this topic, even indirectly, you can find a lot of useful information there. Thank you, Žarko, once again. And now, Mr. Terzic from Ministry of Agriculture. Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, everybody. I would like to greet you all on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm in the rural development sector, and I would like just to add a few comments. This is really very good presentations we saw, very good data. I don't believe it has been done before. This is very valuable data for us all. And as Steve said, you know, we have enough unofficial data that are very important, like Steve said. Just a couple of comments that would be for people developing the strategy. Things happening since 2018 till today, there are several things that will change the picture. This picture, this positive trend will be even better. We need to take into account that in late 2017, early 2018, IPARD began in Serbia. So even, natural persons, companies, cooperatives, they could invest in irrigation systems. This is support for investment. Previously, we had only national measures, and probably that is why we had fewer applications, because the maximum amount of money for support was 1.5 million dinars. So mostly larger producers did not apply. Now we have IPARD, so farmers who produce fruit and vegetables, they can take investments more than several €100,000 and put them into irrigation. And then farmers, in addition to irrigation systems, in parallel at the same application, they could apply for new seedlings, for new plantations, for new orchards, and also for irrigation for areas up to 100 hectares. So this is the applications are still being processed, and I believe there will be even more development there. And Steve also mentioned that in his presentation. We have a small increase in the wine producing sector in vineyards, and I believe that we will see more growth there. Last year we had the first call for vineyards, so now last year they could apply for irrigation systems for the first time. So in 2020, we had a large number of applications, and I believe we will have serious investment and serious increase in vineyards being irrigated. So if we talk about developing strategy, we need to take that into account, and it will be taken, everything will be covered in the next agricultural census 2023. In 2023. This was very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was very useful for all of us. We online, unfortunately, but they can now see more about IPARD 2 program. They can find out more what they offer under IPARD 2 program. So this is attractive financial incentives. And they will attract new investments in the sector, and that is something we need. And once again, these are good trends that we are seeing now, but of course we need to see this issue of water resources further discussed. Thank you very much, Todo. So we are fully ready to cooperate as until now and in the future with the Ministry of Agriculture. And of course, one part of strategy will deal with the Ministry of Agriculture irrigation policy, and IPARD will feature there absolutely. Some kind of guide, perhaps, for people wishing to invest in irrigation. It's a great option for them. Any other comments or suggestions, reactions? Livia, I believe, would like to say something. Or she is just commenting. She says that the presentation was great. Any concrete questions? Perhaps we can use this opportunity to have our presenters today with us. I believe that this is... Please interrupt me. Željko, yes, you can take the floor. Can you hear me? Thank you, team, for this fantastic presentation and look at the situation. What we can see, this is a highly complex thing, a multidisciplinary issue, irrigation is, we can say. And I have a suggestion that for everything that ministry did well and turned out to be well, there should be additional measure added so that technical documents and adequate solutions should support all those things, ensuring the quality of equipment for irrigation. And then we will have exploitation of the system, education, transfer of knowledge to all the users and beneficiaries. One of the problems is labor, not only manual labor in the production process, but also expert labor in terms of those who maintain the systems and transfer latest technologies in terms of irrigation, and they will ensure added value of production. Thank you. Thank you for your suggestion very much. I can say that this is really a very good suggestion, and it is good to have that we have with us Mr. Terzic from the Ministry of Agriculture. He will take that into account and consider that together with his colleagues, especially those who program the budgets, especially those funds that aid Serbia in its competitiveness. Steve or Zoran, would you like to say something especially? If you would like to add something, please interrupt me. And we have a question now related to extension services. I can say from my part that extension services may and should play a significant role in knowledge, in transfer of knowledge, including the knowledge that we acquired today, especially in terms when it comes to those farmers who plan investment into fruit and vegetables, and there are many. And that which is a good thing is that people have huge capitals in Serbian terms, so they should have, good investments. There we talk about several decades of investment and their exploitations, and it's better not to make mistakes at the beginning. You can correct them later, but then it would require additional finances probably. So extension services should play, and they do have play an important role. We know that they are not very many in the extension services, but they contact thousands of farms. So thanks to modern technologies like Zoom, they can contact many more of them, and they have a very important role. Zoran, would you like to say something? Perhaps, yes, I agree with Željko. Željko knows that, and most of the colleagues know that. We need project technical documents for all investments practically. So for IPARD 2, we will also absolutely need the project documents. For small systems, I agree. They do not ask for project technical documents, but they only ask for invoices, and then payments are made against those invoices. I agree that extension services play an important role here and in other areas, There are about 300 people working in extension services as advisors, but the total number of people working in extension services is 700. I hope they will be able to help. Thank you. Thank you, Zoran. In the meantime, Mirko Vlacho asked for the floor, but before that, there is a comment by Irina Savic. And she says that if several farms use the same water, how are they going to measure that? And who will be in charge of building infrastructure for water meters, actually, for measuring the consumption of water? What I can say for Svilajnac, Negotin, and for Vojvodina, there are some investments planned, and all of them provide for also infrastructure for measuring water consumption. So when we talk about budget funds that the government provides, all those projects will take this as an essential element, and this will be an integral part of their investment, the way of measuring water consumption. We discussed these issues before at our meetings that also, I believe, were very useful. This is something that people often ignore or not take into account properly. This is a highly complex issue demanding comprehensive analysis. Now, I would like to give the floor to colleague Mirko Vlacho from the ministry. Please take the floor.
Mirko, da li se čujemo ili smo se dovoljno dotakli ulogi savjetodavaca?
Mirko, are you there? Maybe we've dealt with the advisory services enough. It seems that there's a technical glitch with Mirko's computer.
Da, čujemo se sada. Izvoli Mirko.
Ja se izvinjavam, imam mali prekid interneta ovde.
We had an internet issue here. First and foremost, I would like to thank Steve for his analysis on behalf of the Department for Advisory Services in the Ministry. Regarding the question you mentioned in the mid part, the role of the advisory services will be to begin with, to present the analysis, to collect, to relay the usefulness of irrigation to agricultural producers, to farmers. Many of the farmers rely on our services. And they will, of course, the advisors will relay the importance of irrigation to agricultural holdings. Besides this, they will get support in filling out the adequate forms for e-part. All our advisors do this, and this support is free for our producers, and we want to ensure they have an easier access to the funds and the irrigation systems as such. Thank you, Mirko. We will remain in touch with you and with the rest of the colleagues from the Ministry of Agriculture for all of our materials to find their way to the advisors so they can relay the information to producers. I don't see we have any more questions. We are over the allotted time, which I think is good, which means that the event was successful, it was useful to our audience. Before I give the floor to Jacopo Montini to thank the participants on behalf of the FAO, I would like to summarize that today we had an opportunity to hear great presentations by both Steve and Zoran, who have provided us with outstanding insight on irrigation and the trends in the Republic of Serbia related to thereof. We heard of various statistical data on surfaces, number of holdings. We also had a chance to hear about the results from the 2012 census, large research from 2018. All these information were collected, analyzed. Everyone who we could have reached directly, we did, and this was then reflected in the presentation. These information will, of course, find their way in the strategy and the action plan. They will be used in the strategy and the action plan because we want to make sure investments are adequately targeted and investments are promoted in order for all of us to have good quality water and have good irrigation, but good quality water to end with. We have something related to vines and wine producing when it comes to water quality, so we can apply similar principles to other crops as well. Also, we heard about IPART. IPART 2, if funds remain available, I believe this was a great intervention from Mr. Terzic from the Ministry of Agriculture. At the end, we also touched upon the role of the advisory services, for which we believe it's very important, very strong, and it represents a link between the experts and decision makers in this area. They help both the natural persons and the legal persons in achieving their greatest agricultural potential. We also dealt with the measurement of water or the usage of water that should be taken into consideration when actually planning future investments. I would like to thank everyone for their participation in this event. I believe this event was very useful for all. All materials are available on our website, www.navodnjavanje.info. Please feel free to visit the website, see what we've done so far. We would like to thank the Water Directorate for the event today and also for all support thus far that has been provided. We will try from our end to reciprocate and ensure we provide the Water Directorate with concrete results, and also to actually have the draft strategy and draft action plan actually present to all the relevant stakeholders. We all remain connected. To finish, I would like to ask Jacopo to address the floor on behalf of FAO. Jacopo, you may take the floor.
Thank you very much, Milos, and thank you very much to Steve and Zoran for this extraordinary presentation, and to all the colleagues for their comments, and high-level participation. I'm very happy that we remain with a high number of participants during the entire workshop, which I believe it is a good sign and a good indicator for us that the heading we choose and the decision of making sure that the strategy is evidence and data-based is correct. So many thanks to all.
just to stress on one point that was raised during the presentation and now by Milos and by all the colleagues, the importance of data, the importance of keeping the research alive and obtaining fresh data to decide upon crucial and important issues like water management and irrigation. By saying this, thank you again. We will probably be quite silent in terms of workshop webinars for the August month. Actually, I confirm there will be no event during the month of August, but we will be back in September with new webinars, workshops, and activities for you all. Please remember, you can contact us at any moment with any sort of questions. You can address us via email. You have all the contacts, or you can use the website within the contact tab. All the materials, again, are available. So please feel free to watch it again, to share it with colleagues, peers that could not attend the workshop. And again, your comments are crucial to ensure that we have a strong and evidence-based and most of all feasible Serb irrigation strategy. With that, thank you very much to all. Thank you very much again to the Water Management Directorate for their constant support and hosting this event. And I wish you all a great summer and see you all in September for our next events. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to Steve and Zoran for their extraordinary presentation and to Milos for his smooth and good as usual moderation. Thank you very much, colleagues. You have a nice end of the day. Bye-bye.
Hvala, prijatno, prijatno.
Thank you, and this is the end of interpretation.